Have you ever visited a country you only heard of before, dreaming and imagining what it would be to finally go there? And when you finally reached this country, that it changed your life forever? Well, then you might somewhat know how this person felt when he went to a different country, and when he came back, changed the entire world in which he lived in. A short disclaimer beforehand. This video is for educational purposes, and I do not endorse the actions of every figure in this video. I also tried to source every claim in this video thoroughly as well, but I still might have made some mistakes, so keep that in mind. Whee! I'm not late yet. Okay, I hope you've read the syllabus. AP Japanese History, let's go! Woo! Japan in the 19th century was like a medieval stronghold. Under the Sakoku policy of 1603, Japan was left in societal status. The subsequent Edo period would reign in a flourishing period of stability. However, due to strict policy, also of repression and authoritarianism, no foreigners were allowed to enter Japan, and the few that were permitted to had to stay on the artificial island of Dejima, built for Dutch traders that came to Japan through the Nanban trade system. Although there were exceptions, it's fair to say Japan basically technologically and academically stagnated in the 17th century. One of these exceptions was rangaku, or Dutch learning, as it was a permitted way to import knowledge from Europe through the Dutch, but this scheme was fairly limited. This all came to an abrupt end, however, as in 1852, black ships sailed into Tokyo Bay. Commanded by a strange foreigner with white skin, they were here to bring an ultimatum.
Open the country. Stop having it be closed.
Commodore Matthew Perry, through gunboat diplomacy, had begun a process that in time would fundamentally change Japanese society forever. Let's turn back the clock a bit, 10 years before. The subject of our video, Nakae Chōmin, was born as Nakae Tokusuke in Koichi on Shikoku. His family were Ashigaru in service to the Yamaguchi clan. For any of you Total War Shogun 2 fans, it's the standard campaign unit, you know, the choop choop stabby boys. He enjoyed a traditional education. However, he soon discovered rangaku and subsequently yogaku and studied French and Dutch from an early age. So when the foreigners arrived, Chōmin was one of the people interpreting and working for the Japanese Foreign Ministry. In due time, he would come to admire the West and the novel ideas and technology coming to Japan from there. Chōmin went on to state, on the condition of Japan's society,
"Unfortunately, there is no difference between the past and the present."
In due time, the Boshin War would kick off, a civil war to overthrow the shogunate government in Edo and restore imperial rule. Cannons would roar as sabers clashed with katana, and guns, bows, swords, and cannons erupted across Japan. With guns and other help from the West, the shogun was defeated, and his supporters driven further and further north. The imperial banner had proven fruitful, and its mere presence served as a stark symbol of the changing times. And when the cannons finally fell silent, a new Japan was in the process of being born. Chōmin didn't serve in the war. He himself was not much of a fighter, and his role as an interpreter was way too important to be squandered on the front lines. His outlook on war must also have been shaped by his time experiencing the Boshin War secondhand. He went on to state in his book,
"What could they do if we have not an inch of steel nor a single bullet about us, but greet them with civility? If you swing a sword to attack the air, nothing happens to the thin, free air, no matter how sharp the sword may be. Why don't we become like air?"
Now, in context, this would be an extreme position that he envisioned for a world of democracy. Where did he develop this belief? Well, in France. Yes, certainly. What to Chōmin must have been a second home, as he spent 4 years living in France. After the Boshin War had ended, it was time for the Japanese to craft a new society, and so the Japanese government sent out many of their people to go to Western countries and learn their ways. Chōmin joined in on the Iwakura mission to France, where he subsequently stayed. This is also where he became acquainted with the European thinking. It was around this time that the inspiration would stir him to start a new chapter in his life.
Man is born free, yet everywhere he is in chains.
Jean-Jacques Rousseau, the pre-revolution Enlightenment era thinker that started Republican thought in France. Rousseau was on the run for many years, but left a legacy that would far surpass his actions in life. Bouncing from town to town, sometimes in pursuit of knowledge, sometimes pursued by another. Chōmin must have felt some sort of connection for sure, as he was also a very traveled man. Chōmin's life in Paris and Lyon was from then on devoted to studying and translating Rousseau's Du Contrat Social. He studied philosophy, history, law, and French literature under the patronage of the Justice Ministry. Also during his time there, he would get acquainted with Saionji Kinmochi,
So,
one of Japan's future prime ministers and a fellow student of law. These years of rigorous study in France must have been truly enlightening for Chōmin, as on his return he sought himself to combine the new Western ideas that he idolized with the Japanese ideas which he loved so much and grew up with. Soon after he returned to Japan, he started an academy to study French language and culture, where he spent some years teaching his students. And he even spent some time holding office in the Genroin, a sort of democratic national assembly that was also called the Japanese Senate. However, he found politics there to be frustrating and quickly left.
It is not possible to reach the peak of success, but when you suddenly see it here, it is beautiful. However, when you approach it, it feels as if it is alive and has no equal. But when a young man arrives at Yamahanacho, it is different. The fragrance is unrivaled and its color is dark and gloomy. It is difficult to comprehend it all.
This stint in political circles, however, left Chōmin with a thirst for change, and he became involved with politics again when he started a daily newspaper, the Oriental Free Press, a liberal newspaper that was advocating for democracy and republicanism. Around this time, Chōmin became involved with the popular rights movement in Japan, a movement that sought to implement democracy in Japan. In these papers, political topics of all types would be discussed. The strict adherence to tradition, already seen in the Satsuma Rebellion just a few short years before, for example, was sharply criticized.
However, there are people in the prison of cultural custom, and there are two reasons for it being so, for they are wise and foolish.
Little aside here, apparently there's anecdotal evidence that Nakae Chōmin actually met Saigo Takamori, the famous leader of the Satsuma Rebellion and hero general of the Boshin War, in his youth, which is fucking bonkers to think about because, like only 3 years after Chōmin returned to Japan, Takamori would kick off the Satsuma Rebellion in the south. So, you can't make this shit up, can you, huh? But it's only anecdotes, so, grain of salt. Over the following years, his newspaper would get banned for being too critical of the government, so he'd start a new one, which also would get banned. And he would get exiled, so he moved to Osaka and started another one. This is where he would then go on to meet his disciple, Kotoku Suishi. An anarchist journalist whom he would teach his philosophy in the Confucian tradition, but still influenced by the ideals of Rousseau.
Every man, having been born free and master of himself, no one else may under any pretext whatever subject him without his consent. To assert that the son of a slave is born a slave is to assert that he is not born a man.
Chōmin's stint in Osaka was relatively short, however, as he was able to return to Tokyo shortly before Japan would see its first democratic general election. Japan's democracy was built like Britain's, with the lower and upper house. The lower house elected and the upper house appointed. Chōmin was running in the elections, specifically for Osaka's 4th district, a seat he'd actually go on to win. And when he went into the lower house in 1890 with many of his popular rights movement acquaintances in the Gyuto party, he hoped to not repeat the happenings of the Genroin. This hope, however, was dashed, and he soon after left the party and retired. Maybe his approach to democracy was too radical, as he was already widely known as an advocate for democracy.
In the midst of the restrictions on the register, and the obstacles to the 5 desires and 6 vices, if we continue to live vigorously, we can soar. We have the freedom of thought that is the foundation, and so in the 2nd month, we will begin to have freedom in all other areas. And all of these will lead to a wonderful life. From here, we will be able to cultivate the things that we need most, such as welfare, education, and so on.
The same year he decided to try again with political shenanigans, his mother died. And this put a significant stress point on Chōmin, as he already was suffering from alcoholism for many years, and now his general health began to flag too. So, he was a bit hampered in his enthusiasm, but he was still strongly supportive of the development of railroads in Japan, and democracy of course. In 1901, after being diagnosed with esophageal cancer, he had been told,
Mr. Toksuke, sir, you have 1.5 years left to live at best.
He began to ready himself for his impending demise. He was a staunch atheist, and when he wrote his last books, 1.5 years and 1.5 years more, he distanced himself from the concepts of the soul and the afterlife. For him, it was the body that was truly immortal, as it took on new shapes and changed, and the soul would die, leaving the person to crumble into dust. We do not know what Chōmin was actually thinking on his deathbed, but he might have found comfort in the metaphysical philosophy that he laid out in 1.5 years and 1.5 years more. Personally, I like to think it was a passage of his philosophical idol Rousseau that was going through his head.
Nature never deceives us. It is we who deceive ourselves.
See the golden sun on your face, fallen from your brow, a sense of peace. In your eyes, the fear is shadow and there's a light. For as the leaves fall from the tree, so our days will pass us by.
Thank you so very much for watching this. It was only meant as a small introduction to Chōmin, as a sort of timeline and collection to make it more easy for you to navigate this interesting person's life. You should also definitely check out Ian Whitty Berry's more in-depth philosophical video on him. Big thank you to everyone who voiced in this video too. And to end it off, I would love to see everyone subscribe to my channel. It took some serious research to get here. If you're interested in the things I create, I do intend to cover more historical biographies and maybe some artsy culture stuff too. Thank you so very much. Hey, and if I don't see you, good morning, good evening, good afternoon, and good night.